Welcome back. It's high noon, live on LinkedIn. I'm Nikki Robotham in studio with Leah Sefor, and we are talking boundaries are badass. We left off in the last segment talking about the energy we bring to boundaries, but most importantly, the fact that clarity is kind. But most importantly, we also have to be consistent. Because we can't hold a boundary one way one day and then let it sort of drift off in the wind untethered the next day. You know, what are your thoughts around how do we create that clarity succinctly for people when we start to have those conversations around boundaries?
So the consistency is a big one. And I always say, you know, a lot of the time putting the boundary in place is not the hard part. It's maintaining that boundary. That's the hard part, because people are going to test you. You haven't had that boundary before and they don't believe you. So you can be very brave on one day to have the conversation and say, I need to talk to you. The way you have been behaving with me, or the way you spoke to me last week, or the way you handled that situation didn't work for me. It is always your job to teach people how to treat you. So be specific. What is the issue that happened? Why didn't it work for you? How did it impact you? What would you prefer to look like instead? Remember, we all come from different communication systems. So what seems natural for you may not be the way I want to receive that communication. So I've got to teach you how to speak to me and behave with me. If you keep doing this, this is going to be the consequence. People don't talk about consequences when they put a boundary in place. They just say, like, don't do that again. And then they leave it there. Well, why? What's going to happen if I do? So you've got to really think, like, what are the consequences? You know, it's like when parents go, I'm counting to 3, and then nobody even knows what comes after 3 because you never get there. So you've got to put consequences in place, and then you need to maintain those. So do not threaten something in terms of consequence that you're not willing to follow through on. And people have been in a habit of behaving with you for a long time. So just because you're clear, you've got to give others the time to adjust. So they're going to mess up. They're going to say that thing again, or they're going to do that thing again. Your job to be clear is in the moment. Go, okay, hold, right there. Now you've just done that thing that I spoke to you about, or you've just said that thing. Let's talk about that. And then they'll go, oh, you know, because people are generally unconscious in their behavior. And then you can correct. So it's a fine line, because people say, well, how long do you give somebody the allowance to mess up? Well, I don't know. That's between you and that person. But what people do with boundaries is they come back to something weeks after it's happened. And that person may not even remember the event. So the clarity around boundary has to be as it happens. You can even ask for that space and go, a thing has just happened that's making me feel very uneasy right now. Can we just take a moment so I can get clear on what I need to say to you about this? You know, that's the courage you need.
And I think the awareness is pivotal, because habits are hard to break. They're deeply ingrained in our patterns, and for other people as well. And I think that's why I want to talk about the energy as well that we bring to those conversations. And I often joke that, well, it's not a joke really at the end of the day, but the sort of extremes of boundaries. I say that boundaries, when we're centered in ourselves and we're calm, it feels like a gentle garden gate. But we can move to the one extreme where it almost feels like an ultimatum. It's that force, that power over that feels like an electric fence. And the other end is the people pleasing, the seeking of validation, which for me is like a doormat, where you just say, come on in and take everything that you want. I'm just going to say yes to everything. How do we really start to use our language appropriately to make sure that we're not sitting in those extremes of fear and scarcity, but we're sitting in that grounded space of love for ourselves and love for the other person, because we want to hold that space with ease? You know, what would you say to people? Is it things like don't make it personal, talk about your experience of the situation?
Look, I think my golden rule with any conversation is always keep your finger pointed towards yourself.
I love that.
Instead of going, you upset me when you ... I'm upset with myself that I allowed you to ... So I'm having this experience. I perceived it to be this way. I heard it this way. I am having the reaction. I need to educate you about the reaction I'm having based on what you have said or done, so that you can understand me better. The minute you finger point and start a conversation with you, like, defense mechanisms are up and things get very heated. And the doormats, have you said, on the one end of the spectrum, have to launch to that electric fence aggro, because they can't find the easy way to talk about this, because they're overly apologetic and they say sorry all the time, and you know, I don't want to offend you or upset you. So they feel the only way sometimes is to go extreme and then just cut that person completely. So working around boundaries is a lot of inner work, first of all. It's your self-confidence, your self-respect, your self-esteem. Why are you always approval seeking? Why are you always apologizing? Once you work with that, then you can get clearer in feeling brave enough to say, I need to talk to you about something. Just that sentence alone is really hard for people.
Yeah. And I think to your point, and I know this is my personal experience a number of years ago, is where I didn't hold any space for myself and I became that people pleaser. In the few spaces I could hold space for myself, that's where it took on that incredibly defensive. I often joke that it had the protectiveness of a mother lion because this was the only space I could hold for myself. So it did become triggered, it did become reactionary. But we need to start to diffuse that for ourselves. And I think your point around the inner work is essential, because we can't expect someone else to have the awareness for us if we don't hold that awareness for ourselves first. And that's why I love that quote by Anne Lamott, and I use it in my book and in my work a lot, about the lighthouse. So that the lighthouse doesn't run all over the island looking for boats to save. It just stands there shining. It's magnetic. It just says, this is enough. This is where I am. This is the job I have to do. And it doesn't need to be everything to everyone else. It doesn't need to over-explain itself.
But it's your job to hold the line. I mean, you can hold the line. Everybody else decides where they want to be in accordance with that line.
Absolutely.
It's up to them. You know, and if your rules don't work for them, tough. If they don't like your boundaries, then they don't get to have that relationship with you. It's really that simple.
Absolutely. In the next segment, we're going to be talking about no is a complete sentence. We often over-explain ourselves. Men and women both do this. And I think it's really important that if we take that lighthouse sort of analogy, that's where we bring our power back to our centered and grounded selves. Join us in the next segment.